So welcome to this session. My name is Ricardo Sueiras and I'm joined with my colleague.
My name is Gunnar Grosch. Jag är svensk.
And I'm not.
Shout out to Sweden.
Yes, and I'm English stroke Spanish, so shout out to all the Españoles out there. Did I hear? Yeah. So what's this session about? So Gunnar and myself, we've been playing with AI coding assistants for some time now. So who here is using AI coding assistants? Put your hand up. A good amount of you. Who identifies as a vibe coder? Not so many. Oh, come on, I'm sure more of you really secretly are vibe coders, right? So this session is really around how over the last 2 years, we've seen this space change so quickly, so much, right? Whether it's new tools, new IDEs, new frameworks, new methodologies, right? And so this talk is really about what comes next, right? What's the next new hot thing? And we're going to dive deeper into that. So it's actually hard to believe that only 2 years ago, we were all enjoying how in our IDEs, generative AI was helping us to do autocomplete. That quickly got replaced by chat-orientated programming, CHOP, where we had a chat interface, we typed in something, it would give us code, we'd copy and paste it into our programs. And then at the beginning of this year, agentic AI took that prompt, and rather than getting us to do the copying and pasting, it would work and cycle and write the code, test it, and make sure it worked. And that's in like a very, very short period of time.
And agentic AI has really led developers into embracing vibe coding, even though that wasn't the case in this room. I think many of you are using it, though. You just don't dare to admit it. And vibe coding is kind of like a methodology where you would use the creative potential of AI in an unleashed manner to generate code. And I think, honestly, it's fantastic for exploration, rapid prototyping. It's also helpful for developers to use as a way to learn things as well. But taking the output of vibe coding into, or I guess beyond experimentation, it has proved very difficult for a number of different reasons.
Okay. The first reason. Actually, before I do that, put your hands up if that resonated. Are you using vibe coding to experiment, explore, prototype, learn? Put your hand up. Yeah, okay, good. Right. But of course, once you've done that, you want to move, right? You want to move to production. And there were issues with scaling the same approach. These agentic AI tools were good at small things, but they struggled with large or complex code bases, right? They would lose track of what you were asking them to do. They would go down rabbit holes. They would chase their tails, right? And we've probably all experienced that at one point. The second area was really around this kind of lack of control. Developers love to be in control, or is that just me? I don't know. And so, leaving AI unleashed was problematic.
And I think the final challenge was that often the output of these vibe coding sessions, they were great for proof of concepts, but the code wasn't really optimal for anything else. And I think many of you might have seen on LinkedIn that there's now like an army of people who are there to help you clean up your vibe coding mess.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone's doing that here? No? There's jobs out there in the future for us, everyone, right? Okay, so just to recap, what is vibe coding? So vibe coding is this very kind of organic, ephemeral, point-in-time way of writing code, okay? Using chat-orientated programming and keeping everything within that conversation flow. And whilst, we did generate tools to help kind of make that easier for us, they're still very much kind of, the way I like to think of it is like ephemeral, kind of point-in-mind throwaway.
And I think developers love building tools and creating different ways to use tools they'll help us as a developer to do the things we actually want to do. And what we started seeing was that developers creating a number of different techniques to help address some of these challenges that we saw with AI assistants and vibe coding. And I think these tools and techniques then paved the way for a more structured approach to using these tools.
we saw developers kind of succeed initially when they started taking these bigger problems they were trying to solve with vibe coding and kind of break them down, taking a step back, and sort of like thinking how they would break that problem down into smaller chunks. And we actually saw developers go beyond just doing that and actually creating tools to help them. So I'm not sure if anyone's tried this tool out, but actually I found it quite useful and works in a lot of the examples I was trying out.
And we also saw that developers took a step back to try to be more intentional in how they were using these AI coding assistants as well. And stepping back from that initial urge and the instinct to use AI coding assistants to provide fast feedback when creating code, stepping back from that, being more intentional in what we're actually trying to do and what we're trying to achieve with those tools.
So put your hands up if you have experienced the urge, right, to go straight to code, right, rather than taking that step back, right? We've all done it, right? Yeah, exactly. So I know I'm very much in that camp. So in the early stages of like taking a pause was really kind of like a big shift in
Did you see people did this?
They did
it wasn't
that
anymore.
It wasn't committed, was it?
Yeah.
Okay, and probably the thing that most of us will probably resonate with is the amount of stuff we've read and actually tried ourselves around prompt and context engineering, right? As a way to really kind of gain more control in the output of these AI coding assistants. And what we saw is efforts from the community. So this is from an AWS hero, Christian Benzler, so shout out to him, who created a tool that allowed people and developers specifically to share prompts, share rules, to share custom agents, right? So that everyone could learn and benefit from what others were seeing as successful. And actually, when I talk to customers, this is actually a pattern I see with those organizations that are doing this really well, right? Their developer communities are actually beginning to create Git repos where they share prompts as markdown documents or patterns that help them actually share and kind of grow within their own organizations.
And I think developers also started to converging on the idea that chat probably wasn't the best way to work with agentic AI. We needed to start to combine these different techniques in a more structured way, basically through documents.
And actually, this is not something new, right? So the grey beard gives it away. I've been working in this game for a long time. I remember when I first started, right? Documents and specifications were everywhere. So what was needed really was a way of bringing that specification approach to the agentic AI era.
And then different types of techniques like easy application requirement syntax. It's something that was developed by Rolls-Royce over 20 years ago. It helps developers then articulate the way they want to do, but it also helps AI agents with a more consistent and a more concise language.
And at Amazon, we have a large engineering and developer community, and we have begun to see a lot of this as well, right? And we have, for nearly 10 years now, we've been spending a lot of effort and time doing specification and formal reasoning, okay? If you're using things like CEDA or Access Analyzer, that's kind of some of the stuff we've been doing there. And so we were kind of beginning to think about how we would take some of this and use it ourselves. And the way I like to think of it as a specification kind of like tries to formulate your intent as a set of requirements. So we're going to dive into this.
So spec-driven development or specification-driven development, it changes the habit from asking an agent to do a specific task to instead handing over a set of requirements to the agents. So you're basically shifting from micromanagement into delegating things to the agents.
And the way I like to look at this is kind of it achieves three things. First of all, it helps us focus on defining what needs to be done at kind of like a macro level. And helps us therefore then create a set of clear requirements and design docs. So these are the specifications. And then the second thing is it allows us to then make concrete architectural and technology decisions. And then from that, we can then use those to actually give to the agentic AI to generate the code. And the code is generated from specifications rather than from a chat interface with the context to help you.
So if we look at then how spec is different from vibe coding, we can see that there is this shift from ephemeral, transient activities to ones that instead are providing line of sight between intent, what we want to do, and then in the end, the code that is actually generated. And it's focused on breaking down these larger, more complex tasks that vibe coding really isn't doing a good job with into more manageable, discrete tasks that then the agentic AI is really optimized to deliver. And then it also embeds these good practices around context engineering, and it then helps developers be more or get more consistency in the output of what we want to achieve.
And there's actually one thing I forgot to tell you, Gunnar, about this. When I spoke to developers who have been doing this, one of the interesting observations they tell me is that they actually begin to form a closer relationship with the code that these AI coding assistants use, which is interesting, right? So aside from the line of sight from requirements to code, developers actually feel better about actually the code and feel more confident about the code. So as we thought about this, and as our internal developer communities started kind of like putting together kind of like ideas, tools, hacks to do this, what we realized is we wanted a much easier way to do this and improve the developer experience. And so in July this year, we launched a new tool that's focused on spec-driven development. And we released that in July.
So this is Kiro. Anyone used or heard of Kiro?
Oh, a few.
That's a few. Okay, good.
Very good, fantastic.
So Kiro is our version of how you can use spec-driven development. It's a fairly recognizable UI, I'd say, but we'll dive more into how to actually use Kiro now.
Yes, next in the fun thing. Now we're not doing this live because time and stress, but we're going to basically walk you through a couple of scenarios, sort of greenfield building a new application, and then brownfield taking the existing code base, right? Now, last week I was in Copenhagen, and I was speaking to a friend of mine, and he said, if you go to Malmö, is that how you say, is it Malmö or Malmö, or I'm not sure.
Malmö. Malmö.
Malmö.
Malmö.
Malmö. He said, when you go there, you've got to check out Marvin's Pies. Anyone here been to Marvin's Pies? Oh, 1, 2. Okay, right, okay. Now, apparently this is the best pie shop, right? So I'm going to build a pie recommendation app, right? A pie finder, because I like my pies. Right, so we're going to go through how you would typically do this using specifications.
All right, so after we've created a project workspace, we start up Kiro. And Kiro is a fork of the open source VS Codium. That's why it looks familiar. And when you start it, this is the screen that you'll see. It's the standard VS Code, basically, except that there's now a Kiro icon to your left in the activity bar, and that brings up Kiro's spec-driven mechanism. So we're going to go through exactly what that means. But in the main screen, you'll see that we have 2 options. We can use Kiro in the vibe coding mode, where you use the agentic AI part of Kiro to write code based on prompts, like we always have with Vibe. Or we can kick off a spec-driven development session, where we're then sticking with the spec mode. So either of these modes, they're then activated in this chat interface. So being able to then control and configure context, that's one of the most important things when using any AI coding assistant. So in this case, we can then have a lot of different options to add context. That could be files, directories, diagrams, or even URLs that we can add as context. And Kiro then also allows us to switch between different models that we want to use, or we can use the auto mode. And this will then optimize the model based on the task that it's actually doing. Different models are good at different things. And I think this is important. It also allows us to then optimize cost, basically how many tokens we're using as well.
Oops.
It's a bit quick. Context management is, like I said, it's one of the most important things that you have to do when using agentic AI. It helps you align with what you actually want to create in the end. And Kiro, it does this through what's called steering documents.
Okay, So from the UI, we go to the agent steering tab, and we can add steering documents in a couple of ways. So we're clicking the plus sign, and I want to put my personal or my organizational's coding standards. So I create, I enter a name, it brings up the main editor, and it's a standard markdown. So here is the one I use. It's for Python development, Flask. I'm not saying Flask is the best one, but it's great for demoing. And recently I've started switching from pip to UV, so I've updated this to use UV. Okay, and now I have a steering document, and what this means is that's available to Kiro and actually the agentic AI as it starts making plans and creating specs, but also then writing code. Now, what sets steering documents aside, maybe aside from maybe other rules files you might have seen before, is we can actually configure these steering documents to either always be activated only on certain files, or manually activated, right? So we have a lot of control as to how these steering files are added, and this is all from the manual from the website.
So MCP servers, or model context protocol servers, that's been all the rage for, I guess, the past, feels like years, but I guess it's months. Everyone needs to have an MCP server, I guess, has been like the web back in many years ago.
Who here is using MCP? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and what MCP servers does in this case, it extends Kiro's capabilities. So you can connect to all the different types of MCP servers to get additional tools and additional context.
So we can actually configure MCP on the bottom left. We can configure them either at the global level, so every project, or we can configure them just for the project we're working on.
And once we save that JSON configuration, the MCP server details will then show up in the MCP server panel at the bottom left. And if there are any issues or errors, Kiro will alert us before we proceed. And then we can also enable, disable permissions for these MCP tools as we need. We can also look at logs, we can see how they're working, what they're doing, and we can also disable MCP servers. And I think that's a general tips when it comes to MCP. Don't have them enabled unless you actually need them, because they take up valuable space or tokens in your context window. And both the MCP configuration and the steering files that we talked about, they are files within your project workspace under the .kiro directory in this case.
So now that we've actually got some of the grounding work done, we set up context through the steering documents through MCP. We're actually now ready to begin our first spec. So the intent we know, right? I want to build a PyFinder, right? So that's going to help me actually in the next step. So what I do is I can create specs in two ways. From the Kiro panel, I go to the top right, I can click on the plus sign and do it through a UI box. Or I can go to the wizard, and in the chat interface, I can actually type my initial spec that I want, okay? So in this instance, I want to build a web application that helps me find the best pies. And that's going to kickstart the process. We can see that, so these videos are sped up, which is the reason why we all recorded them, because otherwise we'd be here waiting for the thing to go. Right, so we can see that it's kicked off. All the output as you're doing and working with specs is through the UI interface, right? So you're always kept in the loop of what's happening. And we can see here that the steering documents have been added automatically by Kiro. Okay, so as we add those, Kiro takes care of those. We don't have to worry about those. So the first thing you can see on the top left, we've now got our spec, and it's beginning to create the first artifact, which is a requirements document. When we click on the spec, we can see in the main editor, we've now got these three buttons at the top: requirements, design, and task. And if we click on that first one, let's have a look. After a few moments, as the agent works, it's going to fill that. And there we go. So this is our first artifact from creating a spec. And you can see it's in the ears format. Now, when Kiro is creating these specs, these are just files in the file system, just like what Gunnar mentioned before, okay? And it will create a new directory for every single spec, so you have one place. So it's important to version control the project. The version controlling will allow you to go backwards and forwards and manage that. We can see that there are some elements to the requirements. We have an introduction. This is where the initial intent from the chat interface gets converted into an introduction. It's really important to make sure you check that because sometimes it might not always be what you want. We then have a glossary that identifies key terms. And then we actually have the requirements. Now, LLMs, they like to talk a lot. Sometimes they over-engineer or add requirements we don't need. So make sure you go in, edit. And that is a theme of working with specs. You have to edit them a lot. There's a lot of iteration as part of the process. Now, so here is, actually, that's the same thing. I'm just highlighting some of the language of ears. Okay. Now, once you've finished doing the requirements, the Kiro UI on the bottom right provides like a nice kind of helper to move you to the next stage, which is creating the design document. All right. So here we click on that option, and it's going to start generating the design. Now, Kiro has this concept of queues. At the top right, you can actually see. So as you're asking it to do things, so generating specs or working on a vibe session, those tasks are queued. The reason why I mention it is sometimes people wonder why my thing isn't working. It's probably because it's stuck behind something in a queue. And after a few minutes, we've got our requirements. We've now got our design. And we can see that our design actually matches what we've got in our steering document.
So when we compare this to the steering file that we created before, we can see that it has followed those instructions. We knew that was going to work, and it's pre-recorded, so obviously, but it's always worth checking to make sure that the design document, which is a key document, in then being able to generate code in the end, that it is following your best practices. And since these are files, and just like Ricardo said, these are things you can check into your Git repositories that you can send for review so others can look through them as well. And I think that's what we're kind of seeing that people are doing these days, using it similar to how we've done with code before. And just like the requirements doc, this is just a markdown document that lives in the .kiro directory. And that is in a directory created specifically for this particular spec. And again, spend time reviewing the design doc before we proceed to the next step in this workflow.
Right, okay. I think I'm behind on the videos there. Apologies.
So the final step of the workflow is to now take our requirements and our design and break this down into a set of steps or tasks that we will then in the end implement. So we kick off that process by clicking on the moving to implementation plan in the chat UI. And then after a few minutes, we will see that Kiro will generate the detailed implementation plan for us. And once it's finished, we can see in the project directory that we now have a new markdown file that's been created in the same spec directory as the other files. And we can review each of these tasks to make sure that they look sensible. And you'll notice that each set of tasks will have details, what's going to be created, as well as providing a link back to the requirements. And this allows you to link the code that's generated back to that specific requirement that we had. And tasks can be made optional or they can be required. And Kiro is going to ask you whether you want to create an MVP tasks list, which will go through the tasks and make those tasks as optional to reduce the time it takes in the end to generate code. And you can see here that the task with the asterisks, in this case, they are grayed out. This means that Kiro will skip these tasks when we do the code generation phase. If we remove the asterisks, of course, then it will become a mandatory task instead. So once the implementation plan is complete, Kiro is now going to generate a summary page for us. And we are now actually ready for Kiro to start generating code. And compare that to vibe coding, where, well, you would have a lot of code by now, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a detailed set of specs. We have requirements, we have design, and we have the implementation plan that Kiro will now use to generate code for us. And Kiro, in this case, provides a UI helper. And above all of the tasks, you will see basically a link that says Start Task. So when we click on this, Kiro is now going to start generating code to complete that specific task. And the output is going to be displayed in the chat UI. And as Kiro starts generating code, you'll be prompted from time to time based on what Kiro wants to do to get your approval. You can reject the command if you want, but this obviously will stop Kiro from completing that task. You can trust it, meaning that it will not prompt you again from that point onwards. And you can run it, which will execute that specific command point in time. If you click Trust, you'll be prompted to configure at what scope you want to trust it as well. So running commands like writing to the file system and more, they're all configurable and they're controlled through the Kiro settings. And you can tweak these settings over time as well. And as we can see, Kiro is now going through and completing the subtasks of the first task, which is setting up our project structure and all the dependencies that are needed.
Don't worry, we're not going to make you watch it all.
So once Kiro completes a task, you'll be provided with a detailed summary of each of those tasks as well. And for any completed task, you can also view a diff of all the changes that were made. So in this case, we can see that this is a new repo, so there are no other changes than just new files and additions. And you can also go back through the chat history to see what Kiro was actually doing during the execution of a specific task as well. There's also the opportunity to start tasks through the chat UI. The first one, we started by using the UI and clicking the Start Task button. This time, we can use the chat instead to tell it to start tasks 2 and 3, and we will then see that Kiro starts doing those tasks for us.
I'm getting hungry. I want my pie. Okay. So it took about 20 minutes, and this was MVP, so it would have taken longer if I asked it to do the full thing with tests. We can see it's generated the application. So now we want to basically test it out. So again, we get the full README. It's going to start to make sure I want you to see it actually works. So there's Marvin's PyShop website, and we can see we've got our first PyFinder. But I realize when going through this, there's a problem, right? There's no way to add PyShops. So I need to fix this and add a missing feature. So it's an important point. It's a question I always get asked about how does the life cycle work? And we're going to go into this in more detail in a bit. But because we're doing things through specs, we're updating the documents. We're not going into the chat interface and fixing it from there. So what we do is we open up a tab, and we're going to basically here, the typing is very slow. We're going to basically say, update the requirements to add the ability to add a PyShop. And we're going to see that that's actually then going to review the request. It's going to review the requirements, and it's actually now put a new requirement in the actual requirements.md document. It's in his format, and I think that looks pretty good. So now that we've updated the requirements document, you might think, okay, we're done. But no, you're not done. Because as you add new requirements, it might make changes to the design. So we go into the design, we can go through, and then we've got a button there to refine. And the refiner is basically going to go through, review everything, and then it's going to update the design document with anything that's needed based on the change of requirements. And this is really important because in this instance, what we see is it's added a few bits and pieces. And then once we've done that, we can then use, again, the link, the button in the IDE to move to implementation, and then it's going to go through and kind of implement the tasks. And I think that, okay, let's see if that actually finishes. So we can see the new tasks here. And let's go. Right, and after a few minutes, again, it's added a task. If I go to the website and refresh it, I now have got add a shop, okay? And I can now add Marvin's wonderful pie shop into this application.
All right, so we looked at amending and how that changes the workflow. But what if we instead want to create an entirely new feature into our application? Which I think is common. Well, what we can do is we can add multiple specs to the single application. So from the UI, we can click on the plus button to then enter a new spec and type in that I want to add a contact us feature in this case. So if the application already has a spec, when you request this, Kiro will first assess whether this is best delivered as a new spec or if it's just an additional requirement to an existing spec.
Yeah.
So we're going to add a new feature that adds authentication to the app. So add a new spec, want to add a new feature that allows users to register with an email address and then log in. Go. So now Kiro is executing that.
Is it doing it? Do I need to
I think it's done.
It would help if I actually pressed the video.
So we can now see that a new spec has been added. There we go. User authentication, which will kickstart the 3-step workflow once again. Specification, design, and then implementation, the task list. All right. So what we looked at now is net new. We created a new application, the Pie Finder. But I think most of us here, we often end up working on existing projects or existing code bases. Could be something we've worked with for many years, or it could be something that we inherit from someone else. So I guess a common question is how spec-driven development helps us with this. Like we call it, brownfield.
So I have a very simple application. It's a book sharing website, which I created with some people on LinkedIn. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a new directory, git clone it, and then launch Kiro into this project. The first thing I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to use this button, generate steering documents, okay? What it's going to do is Kiro is going to look through this repo and it's going to build 3 artifacts that's going to help ground Kiro in understanding how this application works. And the first thing it's going to do is build a product file, which actually gives an overview of what actually it thinks this application does. And normally I find it gets you 80% of there. You might have to edit it. And
thinks is the important
yes,
word.
Exactly,
there.
yeah. It then generates a tech and structure, which basically goes in more detail as to what the tech stack is, what the directory layout are, and things like that. So we're making progress. And then finally, we can actually create specs like what we saw before, using either the plus sign for the interface or the chat interface. So here I'm going to basically just add a contact us page. There's no specs. Obviously, this is a brand new project. So it's now going to use the steering documents that it's created to understand how this application works. It's going to take those requirements that we've created, and then it's going to work through the same workflow that we've already showed you. So it's actually, the video is still going. And there we go, it's moved to design phase. Now, we're not going to go through the whole process because we've already seen it. It's the same process. But this is sped up through all that phase. And I can launch the application, and it should now have a contact us page on the web application when we look at that. And there we go, contact us. Okay, so what is the life cycle? Because I'm just conscious we've got about 4 minutes left.
Plenty of time.
Yeah. So we've shown you this kind of but the key thing to take away from this, okay, is that the life cycle of the spec starts off with your intent. Your intent generates a need to generate or find the right context, which goes then into creating the life cycle, which is the requirements, the design, and then the tasks. Now, these processes aren't point in time, right? You find that you edit, you revise, and then you go in circles until you're happy with your design, your requirements, your design, and your tasks. When you then implement it and it starts generating code, you may find that maybe the design implemented a library that's got some limitations, at which point you can go back and update the design, which will then update the tasks, and then you have this flow, right? So, and this is still very much emerging. How people are kind of creating these workflows is still very much emerging because it's quite a new space.
So we walked you through how to use Kiro and use spec-driven development, and good news, Kiro is available, so you can actually use it now. There has been a wait list when it comes to Kiro because the demand was actually quite high, I guess is the phrase to use. But right now you can go to kiro.dev, download it, and try it out yourself to try how to use spec-driven development. And if you're interested in learning more about spec-driven development, Kiro, and a whole bunch of other things, you should check out AWS Builder Center. It has a huge community of AWS community people, AWS heroes, community builders, and so on, and also AWS employees, and even the teams that are building Kiro. They publish content, publish things that allows you to learn more about it. You can sign up using the link shown on screen. And what you do then is you create a builder ID. That builder ID is also what allows you to log in to use Kiro for free as well. You can also join us at our AWS booth here during these 3 days, where you can also sign up to get a builder ID or sign up for Builder Center, which gives you a pair of socks as well, I believe.
Very good.
So do check that out. But you can also try out our coding challenge. Anyone here loves Python?
Yeah, a few.
Wow. Well, good news, you can use an AI assistant, so you don't have to know a single thing about Python to do it. Yeah. But you can also print your own stickers and just talk to us about Kiro, spec-driven development, and, well, anything else, I guess.
So with that, there's a QR code that will get you a copy of the slides. The first, I think, 20 will also get AWS 25 credit code. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that you now have a much better idea of what spec-driven development is and how you can use it to go from vibe to viable code. Would love to have conversations with you on the booth. I've got Kiro on my machine. I'm working on projects you can come and see, ask questions. So I'm not sure if we've got time for questions now, or
I don't think we do.
If not, then we'll be out on the AWS booth. We won't escape. We're here for 3 days.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.